up, guys? It's your boy Carlos Imani back again with another episode of Elite Insights. We're on now here with episode 4. I got my brother Rod here coming from the Learning Center, right,
Yeah.
at Hamlin Robertson School, and we're gonna have a conversation about leadership rooted in equity and purpose. Those are a lot of buzzwords in one sentence, but I think as you'll see in this conversation, they all hit true. We're talking about some stuff that is powerful in the sense of if we don't do something, like what kind of detriment that's going to have. So that's what I mean by the information being shared is so powerful. It's about community. It's rooted in our community, in our youth, what we can do now. We're going to share some things that, like, even when I heard them, I was like, dang, I didn't realize it was like that, but it's real stuff. And if we don't talk about it, we can't improve upon it. So that's kind of what we're doing in here. So we'll tap into how we got connected and a little bit about your background. But let me start off with just introducing yourself to the people.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Carlos, for being a part of this opportunity and the platform and the great work that you all are doing. My name is Rod Walton. I'm the Director of Outreach in the Learning Center at Hamlin Robertson School. Originally from Texas. I've been here in Seattle for about 5 years now and
Excellent.
enjoying the experience of being a part of this community and learning and growing with everyone here.
Excellent. All right, so we went. So started in Texas. I like to give a little people. It might be a little unfamiliar. Seattle's a big implant kind of city, and folks is coming, from all over, and always kind of seeking for community, right? I think where we met was actually at NAM for King Day, and they always try to be that hub for community, for that reason. If you're around, that's a place that you can come to kind of get connected. But for a lot of folks, I always like to say, premise with like, all right, who is that? Why should we be listening to what that is? And, is that our people, or is that, what's beyond? But let's give them a little bit about your background on kind of your journey, what got you from Texas. Let's go through school. Let's go through, I want people to get a kind of a sense of, who you are and like why you do what you do.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I mean, it's important. I mean, representation is important, but credibility is more important. And growing up in the South, you really have to find your identity because that's a backdrop of racism that's there. You have to find your way through life and all the challenges that you have to meet as a young person growing up into adulthood. My story is similar to a lot of other folks. Growing up outside of Houston, Texas, it was, growing up in a college town, about 300,000. It was incredible to have that backdrop of having a college and seeing that possibility was there, but navigating the public school system and going through those challenges, and sometimes that was threatened. But worked my way through school. I had affinity for music and for history. That took me to New York City. So I left left home at 16, and was able to, start my musical pursuits and, start college there in New York City and find my way. And I think that's really where I grew up. And, but really bringing that down south attitude and mentality of family and community and bringing that with me wherever I've gone has been really important. And so in that journey, I've learned and navigated through the systems and, to be able to create opportunities, because in the South it's a little bit different. There's a lot of roadblocks that are in the way for young people. There's, the social economic barriers that challenges all of us, but growing up in the South, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit more in your face, a little bit more aggressive. And you have to have tough skin. Even as a young child. And so navigating those spaces, I always had college at the forefront of my mind. That was always a goal that was going to be a part of the plan for me because my family instilled that within me. My parents married young, had me young, and, subsequently had a divorce and was raised by a single mother who, continued to go to school, get her degrees while raising 4 children by herself. So there was a level of excellence that was imparted on us, and coming from a family where, even though I didn't grow up in a home with both of my parents, I had strong marriages around me with my uncles, my aunts, my grandparents. Before my grandmother passed, my grandparents were married for 55 years. So we saw what that looked like, what longevity looks like with Black love and what we can attribute to socially, but then also just that fortitude around excellence, and that there's a level of expectation or respect around your name and what you bring. Respect was everything. And that's a big theme for us in the South. And, being able to move to New York City and move to a place where you have to prove your mettle, You have to, really
You
prove
can make
yourself.
it there.
If you can make it there, you can
Come
make
on.
it anywhere. And I went through all those challenges of being a very, very young kid, stepping into a space where I didn't have family and trying to build community and building friends. And I was fortunate enough to meet a lot of good people who taught me the game, who taught me how to move around in those large spaces. But, just the aggressiveness of what I wanted to do and keeping my goals in front of me, helped me to be able to pursue those in college and community. Came back home and finished school, graduated at Baylor University, moved back to New York and got into the legal and tech space and spent a lot of years there working in community, providing, outside of doing that in the spaces that I was in legal and tech space, was really providing support, technical support for law firms for international matters. So antitrust matters, IP litigation matters. So I did that for about 10 and a half years. But in those spaces, I was still creating community, spearheading different programs with the youth, shadowing experiences, bringing low-income students into those spaces to be able to see Black and brown faces, queer faces in those spaces, and providing mentorship opportunities. Also was a part of the Innocence Project. If I don't know if you're familiar with that, but really it's a pro bono initiative that was started by some attorneys down in Dallas, and now there's several state chapters of that's really working towards exonerating those who have been wrongfully convicted, those who are on death row. And so being a part of that initiative for 3 years was really important to the work that I've done, and also working to transform and reform what's happening at Rikers Island. And so that, in that space was encouraging to be a part of that space and learn and grow and learn about how, access and opportunity really works, especially in the corporate space, and where there's a need for a representation for us to really have a voice in that room. But then at the same time, knowing that, there was not enough effort for community in those spaces. And so the work that I was doing regarding community and bringing those kind of extracurricular initiatives to the spaces that I was in, my heart was really telling me I need to get into community wholeheartedly. And so that's where Seattle came into the picture. For us to come here and have that fresh start with a new career, and a lot of work that I started to do in the last 6 or 7 years in California before we transplanted up here, really, really prepared me for the work that I'm doing today.
No, that's dope. So what I'm hearing is kind of like everything that you went through prepared and led you to the work that you're doing today, and you're kind of able to live in your purpose.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful. I deal a lot with that on the creative side, where a lot of people kind of juggle like, yo, I'm going to do some photography on the side while I work this job, but that's really my passion. And, when can you kind of find it a way to kind of live in your purpose and find things that bring you joy, and be able to navigate that. So that's dope that you're able to kind of figure that out. And a lot of times also, what your purpose was when you were 18 might be different what your purpose is at 25 and 30 and whatnot, as we grow and as we learn and as we absorb, as we, get married, have kids of our own, priorities, things change and things like that. So it's one thing is I always said, like, give yourself grace. I talk to people that might see me like, all right, we have Elite Collective. I started in 2011. I started doing photography in 2000-ish. Started my first business 2002 as Carlos Imani Photography. And, all that, along all that things, I've had, other iterations of jobs and kind of projects and different things, but kind of always maintained myself and I was able to kind of live in that purpose in terms of that was bringing me joy. But what I was photographing and the kind of projects that I was working on and the organizations or people has changed and elevated. But I was kind of able to navigate that space and have that expression throughout. But a lot of people, like, oh man, how did you get there? This, that, the other. I'm like, well, first off, like, people a lot of times like, oh, it happened overnight. Like everything you see that happen overnight, there's 10 years behind it.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
It's years in the making.
Yeah. So whatever is there. And at the same time, though, it's like, give yourself grace and allow yourself room to change. And, folks that was around you before might not be the same folks you're going to be around, moving forward. And that's okay. But what I always say is, like, if you can find that cross between something that you love doing and something that you're good at, that's kind of where your purpose usually you can find, that's where you can find that joy, because one, you enjoy doing it. Like they say that it ain't, it doesn't feel like work if you love what you do. And that's true, Now there's caveats to that because there's certain sets that definitely feel like work because they be long and not interesting. But there's other times, we just did our own version of Tiny Desk. We call it Hella Small Table. And like literally it just flies by and we're just around our people having fun. Like literally there's no budget. We're just all there and just having fun. And it's just like, oh man, that was 4 hours. That went by quick. And then I got to go pick up my kid, and whatnot. So I always tell folks like, allow yourself that grace to kind of find your purpose, kind of take advantage of all opportunities that present themselves. Don't be afraid to take that step. That was a big step going from Texas to New York and to the Bay and now up in Seattle. But like you said, all of that kind of led me to where I am today. And where that is the first Black executive in the Hamlin Robertson School history, which is huge. How long has it been around?
41 years.
41 years, right?
41
so
years.
It's like, and it's crazy. We was talking about this off screen where it's like, I think the current location, you guys been here about 7 years?
We've been in that current location, since 2015.
And I drive by it all the time. It's on radio. We'll dive in a little bit of the history of that space. But forever, I was like, I see the words, I see the building, no idea what's going on there, right? And we'll talk a little bit about the work that you're doing as far as getting that word out, especially to our community and whatnot. But it's interesting how that can play. But and having you here is part of that reason. Now you can speak to them being around that long. Clearly, they're doing something right and servicing the community, and that community has grown. But sometimes people get caught in their own kind of ecosystems and echo chambers where it's like they're only kind of talking to other people that are in their area and they're familiar with. So you being the first in 35 years is dope. But then it's kind of like, what does that mean to you in terms of like what does that moment demand of you, and how do you see yourself kind of in that position?
I mean, that's just pulling back to my roots and growing up in the South and understanding the racial social dynamics, and especially when we talk about the corporate spaces that many of us Black and brown queer folks who are in the minority have to navigate institutionally white spaces. There's a balance there. There's an expectation on one side, and then there's a responsibility on the other side for you to represent. And so I bring that with me everywhere that I go. And in that transition to Hamlin Robertson School, in this transition to Seattle, I wanted to continue to bring that, to be able to represent, to be able to tell that story, bring that story with me from those who can't tell that story themselves, who may no longer be here or don't have the confidence to tell that story. So I bring that to the power that I harness in the work that I do. And it's one of those things you could take it or leave it. And sometimes it's been a challenge. But in this situation and how the work has evolved and how I have transitioned in this space, it is much needed. And, a great organization as Hamlin Robertson is, are celebrating that. And that's something that we need to continue to do when we talk about equity and access and getting the word out about the importance of literacy and the importance of community and why that needs to continue to be cultivated. It needs to be a mindset because it's a lifestyle. It's not just something that we can pick up and put down. It's an essence of our being.
Well, that's dope. And so in terms of getting the word out, that kind of brings you back to, like I said, driving by, not seeing it, then seeing you guys tabling at a community event. I'm like, what's going on there? Then you end up being on stage and stuff like that. And that's literally how you get the word out. And I found out more about what's going on. We had some opportunity to chat, but I'm curious. And again, part of the platform that we have here with Elite Insights is there could be another officer that a different organization in a similar role as you that's trying to navigate, how do I get these services that I know my community needs out to my community? And sometimes you might be a transplant, so it might be difficult. You can't just be like, oh, let me just go to my church and then I can, do all the things, but kind of navigating that space. So what was that like? And so we're talking about NOM, we're talking about King Day, we're talking about community conversations, and NOM wanting to create a space to have, tabling with community orgs. But what was that like? How did you get connected with that event?
Yeah, I know that a lot of people talk about the Seattle freeze.
Right. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Right. And it's one of those things that I would say it is real, but it's navigable. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think the attitude that I bring towards the work and the seriousness and the sense of urgency that I bring, I think people will respect it even if they don't know you, but they respect the passion, the commitment that you have to what you're doing, and they'll give you a chance. And I think that's a lot of ways that I've been able to forge the opportunities and relationships I've been able to build in the city. And with NOM particularly, we're only 3 blocks away, and historically have not had the relationship that we should have because we were developing our own community, which was a new space for us. Like I said, in the last 7 to 8 years being in that space and have moved around as an organization around the city, we've been a very, in years past, a transient kind of school in a sense because we were, taking up space in various spaces until we found our permanent home on Rainier Avenue. We have over 75 zip codes that are represented in our community. So people are driving far and wide. And so trying to navigate that space and build community there, we are now starting to build those, extend those, extension of love and community around. And I think that's where NOM partnership came into place. I've been now going into my 3rd year. I really wanted to make that connection. When I was visiting Seattle before I actually moved here, NOM was the first place that we visited, my wife and I. And it was incredible because the sister at the time, I can't think of her name, but now she's the president of the Black Heritage Society. And I got to meet her at King Day. And it was like, oh, you remember me from 5 years ago?
Sister
Stephanie. I mean, great.
She's
sister,
a town jewel.
Yeah. And so at the time she was there at NOM and, end up having a 4-hour conversation with her and spend half the day with her, just learning about Seattle, learning about the work of the museum. And now being in this space, that was one of the first organizations when I took over this role that I wanted to reach out to because I saw the importance of this place in the space and how it's so much needed to continue to advocate that living history of our culture, not only in the city, but who we are as a people in this country, and tell that story and get families or other organizations involved in not working in silos as we are in South Seattle, but really coming together, sharing knowledge, sharing resource, and what a great hub that is to be able to do that. And so we've had some interactions, unofficial interactions with the museum, with our teachers, and we've sent kids over there for various exhibits that were happening. But I really wanted to make it intentional to reach out. And so I met with Brother Brandon. And we met and had a couple of conversations. It was really great, and just understanding what his vision is for the museum and where they were trying to go, and him understanding what mine is and how we can co-collaborate in that space and in that corner of our world. And that's how King Day 2025 came to be, which was just an incredible experience.
No, that's dope. And then for folks that wasn't able to be there, I look at with the Elite Collective, how we engage with community. It's generally going to be, one of 3 ways, right? We have our elevate, amplify, and engage. And for us, that shows up as like elevating live events. That might be a fundraiser, a gala, some kind of live experience. And then we amplify voices. And that's usually how we show up and have an opportunity to integrate with other community-based organizations where we help them amplify their voices, tell their stories, because we're super proponents of like, if you don't tell your story, someone else is going to do it for you. Right. So you want to, control your narrative and tell your story. And then engage is the community engagement portion of it, where we do other kind of activations and different things. So King Day was kind of a cool event where we were doing a little bit of different things. So we had like a photo booth and some other things going on. And then they, Brother Brennan, had, as you mentioned, had this idea around community conversations where the museum could have a conversation with some other community groups talking about what they're doing. I think their overall message, if I remember, was together forward.
Together forward, yeah.
And it was like, all right, how can we do this together as we move forward? And we had the challenge of like, all right, we have this dope community space. People are going to be tabling. There's going to be a lot of conversation going on. And then we also want to have like this live thing happening in the front. And then for us, it's like, okay, it's not a live stream, but we're going to go live to tape and we're going to record it. And it just, similar kind of like this. So it's a 2-person conversation on a stage. I always tell people, as we have them here, if we're going to be dealing with melanated folks, we got to make sure we got some light in. So threw the spotlight in the back, had a 3-camera setup, and had some microphones for you guys on stage. And then for us, it's just a matter of like, all right, we placed it out there. You guys are going to be lit well. We're going to be able to capture the conversation and just let it unfold, right?
Yeah.
And it was dope to kind of see the different things folks was talking about. I think we had King County Health was there.
Yep.
You were there. We had Brother Ed King about talking about Pottery Northwest. I forget the other conversation, but it was dope to just kind of see these different pockets, and
Yeah.
folks are reaching community in different ways that are all a necessity, but in their own way. And that was kind of our thing, is like, all right, how can we amplify those voices? And that's how we connected and we're able to kind of continue on. And I think it's important, from a creative standpoint, to one is to show up, right? You need to be in places. So if you're new to a city or new to an area and you're like, man, I'm not getting no business, like, one is like, man, show up, just kind of be present, see how can you give, how can I lean in? It's coming from a place of service, I think, has gotten me as far as I've gotten in life. It was just kind of leading with that. And it's like, I just feel like, obviously you got to handle business and, take care of bills and all those kinds of things. But if you lead with service, I feel like the money will always kind of work its way out. But if you lead with that way, you'll kind of find your way. You kind of get in where you fit in with that, so you can show up. And a lot of events, we start off just doing photos, and then there might be a video need later, and then it turns into something like a King Day that we were able to help produce. And then you get to meet people, right? We just kind of met off the cuff, like, yo, we need to connect, what's your number, what's going on? And then I got to dive a little bit deeper into what you guys have going on. We had a phone conversation. I was like, okay, stop right. I mean, we can still talk, but stop right there in terms of, we need to get this on camera, and our community needs to hear what's going on. And that's kind of where I want to lead this next part of the conversation. Of one is the work that you guys are doing there. Dig into a little bit about some of the statistics that I had no idea about, that was kind of mind blowing for me, and that's why I was like, let's dig into this and create some space for it. But yeah, let's kind of go into a little bit of the work that you guys do there and how it affects and applies to our community.
Yeah, and I like that you had mentioned earlier about telling your own story, and I think that's so important, that when we talk about, in the education space, and when we talk about the journey of Black and brown folks in this country, our story has been hijacked, reworded, flipped, and weaponized against us, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's in these institutional spaces that, many of us are working tirelessly to turn the tide of those perceptions that have been built from those lies, right? Those lies that people are, and many of our young folks are believing about themselves. And I think through the initiatives that we're working through, that we're creating, the conversations that we're having, the recorded history that you all are presenting for many generations to come, to learn about this experience, and the work that we're doing right now is really going to build a growth mindset for our future leaders. That's really going to allow them and empower them to be able to embrace themselves, how they learn, and create their own paths. And so in the work that we do, we want to continue to do that, empower students, empower families, and really ring the alarm about literacy and how important that is. You always feel in conversations, it may, get that kind of negative vibe from folks around their experience in education and learning and studying, and nobody wants to do it, but it's so critical into who we are and who we have to become to be able to survive, right, in this country, and be able to thrive in the spaces that we're thriving in. Education is how we are empowered to the future. It's important. And, it has been intentionally flipped and sold to us as if it's not important, or at least not important for us, right? Where every other community is pressing that forward, that education is first and foremost, and how you're going to be able to make your way in the world. We need to reverberate that message in our own community. And a lot of that is because of the experiences that, those who have gone before us, our parents and our grandparents, have experienced in the public school space. That the attitudes have changed over generations, and now when we talk about the current generation, there's a disinterest in learning, just because who we're learning from and what we're actually being taught. And so in the conversations that we have, the initiatives that we're developing, we want to develop that love again. We want to reignite that passionate love of learning again with families, and the importance of literacy. Frederick Douglass said that, once you learn to read, you'll be free forever. And we knew that even coming into this country, And thinking about the period of slavery, how important literacy was to learn and navigate the world, because you had so many people who were brought here from many cultures and languages that were literate in their own language, but learning and having to navigate language and learning to read in this language that was often forbidden for obvious reasons, because that knowledge was kept from us, to suppress us, right? And we see it, not only just on a racial standpoint, but just navigating the world. If you don't have the ability to read, you can't buy a car, you can't buy a home, you can't navigate your medical bills, right? You don't know how to advocate for something that you don't know exists because you have not navigated the language, that also builds comprehension in the way you think about things and question things. And so we want to empower folks young, because there's a lot of aspects of it. Is not just learning how to read. It's also, having access to the tools and resources to position you to be able to read. And then how do you be empowered in that space to utilize those tools to create a life that you want? And so through those programs and initiatives that we're creating in the Learning Center, we're doing just that. It's raising the awareness, building those relationships that have been broken historically in the school district between communities of color and the public school district. I mean, it's a failed system. And I think everyone across the board, black or white, can agree that it's a failed system. And now we see that it's been used as, political talking piece for many, many years. And people are jumping into that conversation, trying to dictate what that experience actually looks like for a lot of people. And the one voice that is missing out of that conversation is the actual community, the parents, the people that it impacts the most. And so, we want to push that conversation for families to be able to understand the system that they're navigating, and support their students in the way they know how to. But when we talk about education, we talk about learning differences, in a lot of our communities and communities of color, that's a taboo talking point. That's something that's not talked about at the dinner table, that it would be in our white families and families who are more in the know and have access to tools that we may not be able to afford. And so we want to empower families to understand that, this is something that is prevalent in our community. This is something that we need to talk about. It's nothing to be ashamed about, but it's something that we need to activate a sense of urgency around, to be able to get that early intervention. And so we can correct these issues. And so we can develop that academic identity and grit in our students to be able to say, hey, I have a challenge, or I'm facing a challenge as a struggling reader, but I have the tools and support and the people behind me to make this my own thing, and find empowerment in that. And so, with our programs, it's that acknowledgement of the issue. It's also not only just the community conversations and the workshops that we do with parents, but also with teachers. That's the other side of it. When you look at the school districts and why public school and the school system has ultimately failed American public, has been the resources, lack of resources depending on where you are, or resources that has been withheld depending on where you are, or administrations scrambling and trying to find the thing that works best. Because for a period of time when we talked about literacy, that was just a black and brown problem. Only black and brown students were, struggling. And now we see, when you look at the data and you look at the crisis that's happening in this country, it's all students. So that tells you that the system itself, the curriculum and the different things that we've been navigating over these decades have actually failed. The culture around that curriculum, the culture around that school experience has failed our students as well. And so how do we reset the mindset and build the love again for learning, build the love again for reading, and then create a system in partnership with school districts and other organizations who are doing the work around education and student-focused initiatives? How do we collectively build a wraparound cocoon experience that empowers families, students, and encourages teachers, and working in that collaborative space around putting students first?
Oh, I love that. And then even to pull it back a little bit, just for folks that might not know the actual work.
Yeah.
A lot of it from my perspective is some work around demystifying, right? And just kind of understanding what's going on. We're talking about challenges, that can show up in different ways, with like dyslexia and just other neurodivergent things, ADHD, and some of these, buzzwords or whatever, again, like that we're not talking about at kitchen tables. A lot of things that like, that's just our
Not
little
my
cousin.
kid.
He's special, or,
He's slow.
whatever, he's slow. But understanding where, we have mentioned, like, you have glasses on today. For our folks that are listening on the audio podcast, but you have glasses on today, and it's like to me, when you were talking to me before, it was just like, oh, that makes sense. If my child had a problem with vision, and we identified, oh, you can't see near or far or whatever your vision status is, maybe we should look at a tool to help you navigate life fully, right? And that could be in the form of glasses or contacts or laser corrective or whatever, right? But here's the issue. Let me help you address that. And a lot of times that's kind of easy to identify because your child is squinting and, whatever, and they're not able to see. And then you throw some glasses on and now they have a whole new world, right? And that can show up through like with dyslexia or whatever, where it's like, let's identify it, like figure it out, and then let's get them the help that they need. Let's get them, if it's that IEP, if it's, whatever it is, figuring it out. Because at the end of the day, it's like, if we love our kids, we want to provide them with the tools necessary. And then you could actually, this would be a great time to kind of dive into the statistics. Because I mean, it was mind blowing when you was telling me the first time, where it's like, oh yeah, I'm sure it was something, but it was like, oh man, okay, it's a lot worse than I thought. So just kind of going off, some of those around just reading comprehension, and then how it affects our Black and brown communities. If you want to dive into a little bit of that.
We are in a literacy crisis, and we've been in one 30, 40 years. And it's been cracks in the system as far as infrastructure. It's been the lack of social emotional learning supports. It's been the lack of trust and community between families and school districts. It's been a lot of things. And now we talk about the political side of it, when we talk about how school boards and other entities are influencing school districts in such a way that it is very counterproductive and harmful to students' learning. There's a lot of political dollars now that are involved in school boards, and there's a lot of hidden agendas that are operating in school boards and in school districts across the country that at the end of the day, it leaves Black and brown communities out in the cold. And so when we look at literacy, and specifically talking about things like dyslexia, 1 in 5 people on earth have dyslexia. So you've met several thousands of people in your lifetime that have dyslexia, and many of them might
Can
not
you
have
break
known
down real quick what it was? 'Cause even my understanding, like in my head, dyslexia means if you saw the word CAN, you saw it, and then it looked like NAC. That's what I thought dyslexia was, where you just seeing things backwards, but that's not it at all.
I mean, there are some people who are misplacing. It's a piece of it, but it's not. That's kind of been the explanation that a lot of people have gravitated to. But it's really the disconnect between letters, the recognizing the letter and the corresponding sounds, and that's really seeing CAN and not understanding the C makes a cuss sound or a ass sound. That's when we talk about phonics, and when you saw in the late 80s and 90s,
Click on phonics worked for me.
That's why it was so important. But that was a very trivial time as far as educators in the country really trying to figure out what research-backed practice really worked, because we were in a literacy crisis then, and there was a lot of different curricula and ways and strategies of teaching reading to folks that were out there. And, there was one camp that was saying, hey, it's just exposure to words was enough, right? And so if I reread a book to you several times over, then you would eventually pick up and understand the words that you were reading. But if you have dyslexia, that's not an experience that you would have, because you don't have that connection to letters, because you have a neurological disorder that's not connecting those two words and sounds together. And so, just being exposed to letters and to words was not enough. Now, maybe they found some success with traditional learners who didn't have a learning difference, but specifically for those who had dyslexia, that's not the way that's not explicit instruction, which now that we know is what is key to keeping students on track, developing and navigating how to connect sounds to the letters, how to have that comprehension, the fluency to be able to navigate any word. Because in that sense, if I just exposed you to a couple of words and you just remembered it, yeah, you could use it in the best way you could. You might not always use it correctly, but you would
Right.
use it in a way. But at the same time, if I gave you a book that you never saw before and those words were in it, you probably couldn't pick them out, right?
Right.
Because you're working off of memory and not being able to approach any word and navigate it, which we know the science of reading actually teaches you to do, and to be able to connect those sounds to, letters to sounds, and to be able to understand those small bites of sound, which we call phonemes, phonemic awareness, and phonics, and working together and how to navigate and put together words so you could be able to do that same process repetitively with any word you encounter, right? And so
It's more comprehension,
it's the more
not just
working
memory.
through it and putting exactly. And so now we know that is the science, research science that works. And now that is what is being taught in many school districts, but in a lot of other school districts, it's still not being accepted. And that's something that we need to have across the board to be widely accepted. And we have seen positive results from implementing science of reading in the classroom.
Well, I love that. So back to now we have I wanted to make sure we had a good understanding of what it was. Again, that was news to me, right?
Yeah.
When we were talking about it. So we're at 1 in 5 folks have some form of dyslexia.
So there's 3 forms of dyslexia. There's dyslexia, where it's the struggle, where's the reading part that you struggle with. There's also dysgraphia, which is folks who are struggling with the writing piece of it, connecting the, decoding and encoding and understanding that W makes the W sound, but also being able to connect that when you see it and replicate that in written form. And then also dyscalculia, which is the mixture of numbers and struggling with the math concepts. So there's 3 forms of dyslexia that 1 in 5 people on earth are challenged with.
Okay. And then in terms of like our community specifically, I remember there was like some big discrepancies in terms of, it's still 1 in 5, but in terms of like identifying it and getting services, and then how that applies to reading, right?
And so when you look at the national reading rates and results for our fourth grade readers, which is kind of a baseline that the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is basically the nation's report card, assesses reading performance. You see that, our nation's 4th graders are only 41% are operating below basic.
Man.
41%, that's black and white.
Yeah.
That's happening. And so we're looking at a level of basic, proficient, and advanced. And so almost half of our country's 4th graders are below. A third of our 8th graders are reading below basic, right? And then when you drill down to our BIPOC communities, black and brown, Native American, we're talking about 55, 57, 52%. So that's over half of our people in our community are struggling to read. Math, same way. 2/3 of our students in this country are below basic, below proficient in math. And again, when we're drilling down to our community, we're talking about 40, 50, 55% that are operating below basic. And so when you think about that number holistically, when we talk about black and brown students, black students in particular, that's 84% of black students in this country are not proficient in reading or math.
That's insane.
We should all be screaming our heads off.
Unacceptable.
Around this, it's unacceptable, right? And we go into a space, and when we talk about dyslexia, another misnomer is that people don't understand is that dyslexia is hereditary. So one of your parents or both of your parents may have it, and so when we are approaching those challenges with students and how to serve them, you have to keep in mind that you have to serve the family too, because they're also experiencing those challenges as well. And so we have these conversations all the time, but just learning how people communicate. You mentioned, the example about glasses. Everyone learns differently, and that's okay. And we have to normalize that. And that's a lot of conversations that we have about normalizing. We may both sit in a lecture, and you may have perfect hearing memory and listen to everything that speaker says and remember every point that they say. But I'm a person, I'm visual. I need to write it down. I need to look at it. I need to digest it in that way. We're learning differently. And so when you talk about accommodations and what's needed, I may need more time. You may need text to speech. Another may need someone to read it out loud for them and then allow them to process it. And that should all be incorporated into the way that we learn. But it also takes an attitude for school districts and school leaders to build a culture where that's inclusive into the way that a student learns, and not force kids to operate under the assumption that all students learn the same way.
Right.
You can't
Like cookie
process,
cutter. Right.
right. And it's naturally going to happen when you have 30 kids in the classroom. You
Right.
can't provide that individual attention. You're processing them as a whole, but they're not learning that way.
Right.
And so, we are, being instrumental in having those conversations with school leaders around culture. And that's something that I've done in the past, in the work that I've done in education, to talk about not only their policies, when we talk about behavior and we're talking about how it ties into learning differences, those are automatically, now we're starting to see more being assumed in the white community with students, as far as, identifying those learning differences, or considering that being a factor in the challenges that they're learning. But when it comes to Black and brown, it's automatically associated with behavior, right? And so now we're talking about policies that are keeping Black and brown kids out of the classroom and isolated from the learning, because you weren't able to identify the signs that they actually had a learning difference, and you saw it as a behavior issue. And so when we look at folks who have the learning differences, exactly, he's just bad, right? And so when we talk about folks with learning differences, there's a lot of things that are in play that they're doing to mask their learning difference. And sometimes it will show up as a behavior. Sometimes it's that imposter syndrome. Sometimes it's that I'm going to be the teacher's pet because I want her not to ask me that question. And if I'm busy helping her out or him out and doing chores around the classroom, then I won't get called on, or hiding behind someone else. Or, I have to go to the bathroom once we start going through and calling out, everyone taking a turn and answering or reading. And so we want to be able to help and train not only teachers but parents to see these signs and say, hey, something might be going on. Let me take a deep dive and ask some of those questions. So that leads me to some of the work that we're doing in Washington State that has been done at OSPI, our leading authority of education. In 2018, SB 6162 was passed, which was a bill that really identified what learning differences and learning disabilities were in our states. It was identified as 13. And in that was the passing of the universal screening law, and that all K through 2 students in our state would be screened for signs of dyslexia, which is incredible. So now you're seeing a lot of states starting to finally realize that dyslexia is a real learning difference.
Let me stop you real quick. So how does that apply to community? So you're saying there's a law that was passed that that all childs need to be screened, and it was K through 2? So does that mean that they can come to your guys' school and it's free?
They can go to any school. They should have that opportunity in any school. So this is way that when we talk about learning differences.
Are all of them equally good at screening?
No.
Okay.
and that is the challenge while we talk about the contributing factors to a broken system.
Could they come to you guys?
They could. And so in that, that's where the conversation is, that you're seeing that there's pockets of efforts. There's framework around what should be done.
And they just might not have not that they're bad or it's nefarious. They just might not have the training.
They may not have the training.
Yeah.
Some are not interested, right? Because I've worked with a lot of school districts, whether the group may have been one with learning differences, or they might have just been Black and brown and just underperforming, is that, hey, I have 85% of my student body performing at a proficient level. I'm not really worried about the other 15, right? Because we have enough numbers. Sometimes for some school leaders, it's a number game. For others, it's just that I don't have the resources of the time, or I don't want to use funding in that way. And so now you're seeing states starting to step in and say, hey, we're seeing this in too many communities.
Right.
There's the science now, there's the research now, we have to do something about it. But when we talk about the implementation and the call to action for it, that's where it kind of falls by the wayside in different schools. And so through the Learning Center, we're weaving all those pieces together. Number one, acknowledging, hey, learning differences are here, and that's not something that provides a quick fix. That's something that we have to partner as a community around, that we have to empower teachers, we have to empower parents, so we can collectively empower students to be able to navigate this learning challenge. And so now that we know that the state has legislation in place, this aligns with the work that we're doing to be able to provide that guidance in training teachers in how to spot differences in the classroom. Those child find practices of saying, hey, I may be in a room of 30 students, but there's some things I can quickly find that shows, hey, this student may be struggling. Let me drill down and understand what's going on with them. but you have to be trained to understand that.
Right.
There's instructional practices that are not being taught to other teachers, right? Because it's a process where, we're just trying to get teachers on board. We don't have enough teachers. They may be subbing. They may be a sub for a year. And we don't have the funds to be able to provide professional development. So through the Learning Center, we're creating those opportunities. We're having those conversations, empowering parents. We're building advocacy there for them to be able to, if you see something, say something.
Right.
Be involved with what your students are doing. Right now, it's a different game than when we were in students, that we would have to bring homework home every night. And a lot of school districts, that's not the case anymore. They're doing it on campus. So it's a lot harder for parents to spot,
to identify, right,
that something's really going on. But when we're talking about reading, number one, read to your child every night.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're reading to your child, not just you reading, have them read. And if they're fumbling and they're stumbling and they're bumbling, investigate that.
Mm-hmm.
If you see that continuance, next step is have a talk with the teacher, right? And try to identify that. But then in those conversations, this is what we're opening parents' eyes to, is to be more involved in that process, have those connections with teachers, setting goals with students, with families at the beginning of the year, staying on top of if that's happening or not, and having those continuous conversations with teachers and with school leaders, and not just when something happens, but being proactive to make sure we're creating those spaces for them. So through the training, that's what we're going to see a difference in impact of students being identified early, and early interventions should follow. And then also understanding the legislation. When we talk about SB 6162 and what it intends, COVID hit. So that happened in 2018, COVID hit. And now you have a lot of schools that are just scrambling to keep kids online and keep kids in. We lost a lot of students. A lot of students left the classroom, never returned. And so school districts were scrambling to find ways to get back online, to provide that virtual platform and learning for services. And then when we talk about the students who have been historically underperforming or having learning differences, that was even more of a challenge, right? Because you needed that knee in-person instruction, and now you were navigating your challenges virtually, and there was a disconnect. And when we look at the numbers and how prevalent they are, and then when we drill down to Black and brown students who have learning differences, 1/3 of that group drops out of school across the country. And the least served population and who has the highest dropout rates, students with learning differences, is Black boys. And so we're screwed all the way around, but through the work through the Learning Center, we're really trying to keep that conversation at the forefront, at the parent level, at the teacher level, and even at the legislative level.
That personal connection, because I remember COVID, not fondly, but I remember it. And then, so my son was born at the very end of December of 2020. So we kind of had this interesting pocket of like, we got to be home with him and got to kind of do that. So we didn't really experience the classroom side of it. But I have cousins and friends and stuff that dealt with that. And, I feel like there's like a disconnect, right, when it's all virtual. And I can only imagine if you have a learning disability, I think, one, it's like, it's a lot of what's wrong with me and things that they're battling, and just being a youth, just kind of navigating growing up. Like you already have that. Now you have this on top of it, right? And you're kind of like you were mentioning, finding ways of like, let me go to the bathroom or be the teacher's pet, or let me, whatever, I'm sick that day, or if I know I got to do that report, or, whatever. They're finding ways to get around it, not addressing it. But when you don't have that personal connection, I feel like a lot of breakthroughs happen through that human connection, right? That empathy, that someone cares, that they're showing an interest in me, helping me get over, my own personal things, that understand that there's nothing wrong with me. Right. I just learn differently. And I need to kind of navigate what that looks like. So that's dope to hear that that's what you guys have going on in the Learning Center. So I'm hearing teachers that might have a want. Are you able to? Can teachers come and connect with you guys around training?
So we provide not only student services, so we provide several a diverse platform and portfolio of student services. Tutoring was our main flagship program that brought a lot of folks to Hamlin Robertson School externally from the community. And, in that is reading, writing, math, and executive function. We want students to be able to be organized and how to organize their day.
I might need to come through that. I need some executive.
We have adults who are part of that program as well. Screening services. It's very important that we're identifying those indicators of dyslexia, and that we're getting that
So
early.
screening services meaning like me as a parent or community member, if I want to if I'm like around youth and
Yeah.
have an interest, I can come and learn how to become a better screener.
You can learn to be that. You can learn to be a screener through our professional development workshops that we work with. We consult school districts and we work with other entities around training how to do that screening. But if you suspect your child has dyslexia, you can bring them in for a screening as well. We provide that to the community, and we have many folks who are coming from across the Puget Sound who are bringing their kids in
Yeah,
for
was
screening.
it 70-something zip
Well,
code?
that's just our full-time students. That doesn't include the other community folks who are coming in.
Just general support.
Yeah, just general support. And so we have a lot of families who are bringing their students in for that screening, and we're providing that detailed report and analysis around what we see and where the support is needed. And they're taking that back to the classroom, to their home districts, to have those conversations with their school leaders and how that may be impacting their IEP or they're requesting our IEP. Now, when I talked about SB 6162, in response to that, what we were able to do in this last year was launch Literacy Link. And Literacy Link was an initiative in response to that K-2 universal screening law and being able to support districts in screening students who might have aged out of the opportunity. So we expanded that to K-5 because many of those students who at the time when that legislation was passed are no longer eligible to be screened. And so we wanted to catch
clearly
them.
they still needed services.
Exactly. So we wanted to catch them now. And so through that, we're doing those screenings and we provide that free in English and Spanish. And then on top of that, we're providing the teacher training workshops on how to identify students in their classrooms, the instructional support that's needed, the strategies, teaching strategies, and so forth for teachers as well. And then also the consulting piece of how to build the bones and the good makings of a strong, solid literacy program and being able to share that knowledge with school districts as well. So we provide that consultancy piece and professional development for teachers and for school districts as well as the student-focused services.
That's dope. This is fantastic. So it sounded like there's many ways to get involved, and it literally is like a village that needs to help raise this kid, especially when 1 in 5, right? So chances are you got someone in your family. Chances are you got someone on your block. Someone definitely in your zip code that need these. And again, it's like there's nothing wrong.
Yeah.
Right. There's nothing wrong. It's just a matter of they learn differently. Let's get them the love and support that they need.
And building awareness around the need for it, right? And when we talk about the community conversations, when we talk about learning differences and learning disabilities, is taboo in a lot of cultures. And so we want to empower and encourage families to have those conversations and to take action because we're on a timer. I mean, when we talk about the development of phonological awareness, which positions students to be able to read and comprehend letters and those connections to sounds, that is, in a traditional sense, that development happens. A child becomes fully developed at the end of second grade, right? And so when we talk about struggling readers in the classroom, oftentimes, and especially when they're very young, a teacher may say, "Oh, they're not getting it right now. Let's give it a little bit more time." But if they actually have a learning difference, you don't have any more time. You want to be able to say, "Hey, let's take the next steps." And I think that was the premise behind the legislation that was passed for the universal screening. I just think that, the struggle and the challenge has been to implement it and that be consistent across school districts across the state. But through these initiatives that we're creating through Literacy Link and through the Learning Center, we're able to revive that again and build connection around that learning.
I'm liking that. So I'm feeling like there's a light at the end of the tunnel there. Hearing those numbers like 40%. And upwards of 53 and higher in BIPOC communities is a little doom and gloom, right? When I first heard it, I was like, dang, but it's like, we got to take it serious. Can you give me a little hope? Folks that do get screened and folks that do get in these programs, what kind of numbers are you seeing in terms of like where they're able to go versus the folks that aren't getting it?
Yeah. I mean, early intervention is key. And then we've seen upwards of 90+% of our turnaround. We're seeing that academic success when early intervention is happening. And now we're starting to see that as more school districts are gravitating to the science of reading and implementing those strategies in the classroom. And now that we're seeing the community connections, whether that's through organizations like ours who are telling the stories, yours who are telling the story, highlighting the need around this crisis and around literacy, and the needs that are in place that need to be things that need to be in place for us to meet the needs of students. You're seeing folks turn around and be honest, have those honest conversations, but also holding school districts' feet to the fire. That partnership between community and school district is very important, and it's been severed for a lot of years. And we have to find ways to connect back to
Be that
our
voice.
teachers. And a lot of that too in the work that I've done in the past is that when you see some of these numbers, it's also the cultural disconnect, right? When you have students who are coming in the classroom and they have social and economic barriers, they have cultural barriers in their school building. There's no trusted adults that they can rely on and can confide in. It's a culture where they feel they're not included, that they're actually excluded or ostracized. That impacts
the food's
their learning.
nasty.
The food's
They
nasty.
ain't got no hot sauce.
Right? You know, they have no hot sauce and everything tastes like beans, right? That they bring all of those feelings and identities into the classroom, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when we're just focusing on curriculum and not those other factors that contribute to the way that they learn, we're failing them as well. So that's why when we hear about social emotional learning, why that's so important, because you need to create a culture around the work itself. It's not only what you're teaching them, but it's how you're teaching them, right? And their experience in the building. That's why I think, things around teachers shadowing students and really understand what a day in the life of a student is, one that you may not particularly interact with all day. Peer-to-peer groups, being able to empower students to be able to have that connection, creating mentorship opportunities, and building those trusted advisor and trusted adult relationships in the building is going to be able to give you the insight that you need to understand that student, understand how they learn, understand their parents, understand their culture. And then when you have a culturally represented curriculum and staff that's reflected of the students that are in that classroom, they can apply those learning techniques and concepts on a cultural basis, right? If I learn how people in my community have navigated concepts and it's taught to me in that such a way, or I'm reading textbooks, or I'm reading instances of new concepts, and it's written by a Black or brown author, a queer author, someone I can identify it, and it's placed in a scenario that I live in every day. It's not an abstract concept anymore. It's something I'm gravitating to learning in a different way. And I think that's on us as educators to be able to find the ways that we can spark that energy and interest in the way that we're learning and introducing concepts to students, and also having those critical conversations at the beginning and throughout the life cycle of the student's learning journey, and not just when something is wrong, but that parents are lockstep in tandem. And so it's being reiterated. Those positive enforce and reaffirm affirmations are being reiterated in the classroom and also when the students at home.
No, I love that. And I'm a firm believer that a lot of things, start at home. It's when you set the tone. That's when a lot of these things happen. We are their first teachers,
yes.
All those kinds of things.
And I want to say this real quick in that when we talk about the home, when we think about students and we think about ourselves as adults, there are two places where we spend the majority of our life outside of our bed, because you do spend like a third of your life.
That's why invest.
But it's
in
the classroom.
Quality bedding.
Exactly. Please do. But it's the classroom and it's the workplace. Mm-hmm. That's where we spend most hours of our day as a child or as an adult. And so it's important, and it's a responsibility for us to be able to create a culture of learning for students. And then also vice versa. And when we talk about the workplace and professional environments, creating an inclusive place where there are accommodations, there are access to materials and to resources, so our employees can be more productive in that space as well, and not have to identify themselves as having a learning difference. But that's baked into the culture of the work that you do.
Mm-hmm. No, I love that. Just to kind of dig back into the home environment, what advice would you give the parent, the caretaker, the person that is in charge of young people in terms of, you start over with, you see them say something, but what are some things that they can just kind of start with at home?
I mean, when children are in their development years, I mean, they are sponges. I mean, they're taking on tons and tons of information. And that's why reading is so important, why reading every day is important to read with your child, because that's blowing up their vocabulary. They're learning thousands of words at a time through those experiences. In a year, or being introduced to new text every single day, or just pockets of text. If you're reading one book, you might read it over a week. But having that exposure to all those different words, when they are navigating and learning to read on their own, when they get into a structure setting, when they're reading on their own, I've seen that word before, or I know how to navigate that word because I'm working through that with my parents, or that concept has been taught to me by my teacher, and I'm remembering it once again of how to do it, and I'm going through the process and the steps to make that word come together and make sense. So number one is always read at home. Read at home every day and have your children to read out loud, because that practice, as we once heard before and several times, that the repetition is the mother of all learning. So you want to build that muscle with them being able to not only understand the concepts that they're developing in school, but being able to reinforce that at home and have them practice that over and over again. Not only helps them to be able to build that memory muscle, but to build that confidence in the work that they're doing, because they're going to struggle, right? But in them being able to do it again, they have the fortitude and aptitude to try, right? So that's what we want, most importantly, for our students and for parents to reiterate and reinforce at home, is that you're going to stumble. That's okay, but you want to continue to try. You want to continue to find different ways to try and find what works for you. And if there's something, a concept that you're just not gravitating to, it's okay to have a conversation with your teacher or with your parents about it. Can you explain this to me in a different way? And I think when we think about AI, that's a lot of ways that you're starting to see teachers and schools now starting to leverage that tool in learning, right? For instance, you may have a student who is in love with baseball, but they don't understand the War of 1812, and learning that it just doesn't really connect. And you can leverage AI to say, can you explain this story to me in terms of baseball? And then be able to gravitate that concept that way. And I think that's a positive way we can leverage AI into helping students learn. But then it's also reinforcing an attitude that we should have as educators, and those of us who are supporting students in different ways, is to navigate and explore all those different ways.
Right. There isn't just one way.
There isn't just one way of learning. So there's a lot of ways of learning, and we should be able to exhaust all of those avenues to make sure the students are getting that and they're moving on and thriving.
No, I love that. Oh, dope. So I wanted to wrap it. I gave you a little hint of how I like to end some of these conversations. We'll go into just this quick little comment, then I just have some quick little one-liners that we'll truly end it with. But I wanted to kind of give you some opportunity to dig a little bit deeper. But complete this sentence: the movement I'm building is about ...
I would say the movement I'm building is about affirmation. I think all the work that we've done in a learning center, not only around learning and literacy, but really about empowerment. And I think that's something that has been lost on our people in our community because of all the social barriers, political barriers that have been put in place for us to thrive. And when the space of education, literacy has been weaponized against our people. When we talked about slavery and how important it was to keep that moving going for slave owners to keep literacy out of our hands, because if we knew better, we do better, right? We would know what was going on, and those scriptures they used against us, we would read the rest of the story and see it was BS, right? And so when we talk about the Reconstruction area where Black people were free, and now they're starting to force their own path in American history, now literacy comes back into place and being weaponized against us again with the literacy test during Jim Crow. And you had to pass those tests to be eligible to vote. And it was it was rigged. It was a rigged system. It was not just put plainly in front of you, but things were taken out. There was those tests were manipulated to ensure that you wouldn't pass them. And now we're stepping into the 60s and the 70s, fighting for civil rights and access to those opportunities, library and literacy resources to our community. And depending if you weren't in a major city, you might not have access to those opportunities. And how do we create those spaces across the board? And now we're looking at literacy, and we're looking at all those years that has failed us. How do we once again build an attitude and an aptitude for learning and affirm that legacy that our ancestors have built of learning? We brought knowledge to this country. We were scientists, we were engineers, and all the great things that we have done in this space since we've been here and continue to do to this day. How do we hand that to our generation today, have them to affirm to believe in themselves more than they do the system, because they're encountering these challenges in the system, and that's impacting the way they see themselves. Those two things are actually separate. And we talked about that at King Day. We talked about telling your story. Get back to who you are. Tell your story, and then fit all those other pieces into your narrative. But your story doesn't change. And I think it's so important that the work that we're doing in the education space and the movement that I'm building collectively with a lot of organizations, including your own, is to affirm people again, to believe in themselves and to understand that, you know what, every opportunity is an opportunity to better yourself and to create the path of life that you want for yourself. No one can dictate that to you. They can try, they can put things in place. There are some things that are naturally, organically, that happens to keep people from getting where they're going, just access, lack of access to things. But you have a decision every day. You have a choice and a chance to take those obstacles and turn it around for your good. And so we want to get people to think about that aspect and bring that aspect to learning and be empowered in that way.
No, I love that. That's dope. Yeah, lastly, I like to throw in these kind of like quick fire questions. They just be kind of a little something fun and leave it on a lighter note. But what's one thing every school leader should know but doesn't?
Ooh, that's a good question. That every child is capable, right?
I love that. A book or quote that changed how you lead?
James Baldwin. These are all of our children.
My
We
man.
either profit or suffer for what they become.
Let's go. Brother James, he stay dropping jewels, man.
Yeah.
Woo. Who are you building a future for?
Everybody. And it's not just every child, but everybody. We are lifelong learners. We're learning our entire lives. And that legacy is for everyone to have a piece of it. There's a vision that everyone's involved in.
I love it.
Yeah.
Joy to you looks like?
Ooh. Equality. People just having access to be themselves, to learn the way they want to learn, to exist the way they want to learn, exist the way they want to exist, and just be in that, and that be okay. Not criticized, not looked at from a different lens, but that presence is enough.
I love that. And what does elite mean in your world?
Elite means accountability. It means continuing to push forward to something greater than yourself. That journey never stops with you. You're just handing it off to someone else. And that's the gold standard of what we're all trying to achieve in our own way, in our own sectors.
Dope. And then lastly, I always like to end, you got your camera over here with that currently a green light. It's going to turn red in a second.
Yeah.
But tap in with the folks and just tell them how they can connect with you, how, like what's next steps and, all those things. Feel free to let the people know.
Yeah, so the Learning Center, we're in South Seattle. We're on Rainier Avenue, 1701 South 20th Avenue. We're open pretty much year round. You can go to our site at www.learningcenter.com. learningcenter.com. You can reach out to Learning Center at hamlinrobertson.org. You can reach out to me at rwalton@hamlinrobertson.org. I believe there's some materials and flyer that will be up. Scan the QR code and be able to check out some of our programs this summer. We have our Summer Academy. Registration is currently open for that. That's a 3-week experience that includes a morning structured reading, writing class, and then also a plethora of afternoon camps. We'll also be taping on a couple of events this summer at Mount Baker Summer Festival, as well as the Wellspring Family Services Resource Fair. And this fall, we'll have Literacy Link will resume again. So make sure you go onto the website. If you're suspecting your child has a learning difference and you want to get screening, you want to get some understanding around what is going on and be able to start that conversation with your school district, go to the website under the screening services and sign up for those. We'll resume those screenings for free in English and in Spanish in the fall. And that we'll provide you a detailed report of what we find and analysis, and you can take that back to your school. And we also provide consultation around what supports that you need. And there's other resources that are available on that site as well, different programs and initiatives that we're starting, college readiness, parents of adolescents and teens, our community library, free literacy resources. So please check it out. Give us a call. We're here for you.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining us and helping folks understand. Like I said, for me, it was just a conversation of like, man, we're just kind of starting our personal journey, our business journey, just from King Day. But for what you were doing, I'm like, we need to get this out. Like, folks need to know. timing is everything. Like early intervention is so huge. And our folks need it. So I wanted to kind of just hurry up and have this conversation so we can get this going. So thanks
and
again.
I would go back to that James Baldwin quote. And our young people are going to contribute to our community in one way or another. And it's on us right now who have the opportunity and the influence to decide and contribute to if that's going to be a positive or a negative experience.
Yeah, because it's going to happen.
It's going to happen
one way or another.
One way or another.
So I appreciate that. And thank you guys for joining us for another episode of Elite Insights with Carlos and Imani. Stay tuned, and we'll see you guys next time.